Dear all, I'm glad to meet you all at our third European seminar. And my name is Sergey Shein. I'm an associate professor and a research fellow at Faculty of World Economy and International Affairs in HC University. And today we will talk about regionalist and secessionist parties and movements in the European Union. I think that it is obvious that this topic is still relevant, connected with the more or less success story with Scotland and Catalonia, and political scientists still try to answer the question: what is the nature of regionalist and separatist movements? How disintegration processes are combined with European integration dynamics, and what are the prospects for the regionalist parties and movements in Europe? And today we have, I think, based on the previous experience, we can continue this academic discussion with new hypotheses, new visions, and new methodological and theoretical tools. So today we have two excellent presentations and three excellent speakers. The first will be Assistant Professor Sanjaume-Kальве, Assistant Professor of Political Theory in the Department of Political and Social Sciences at University Pompeu Fabra. And Professor Sanjaume-Kальве will speak about electoral support of regionalist and secessionist movements and parties in Europe. And then we will see presentation by Yulia Belarus, analyst at the Center of Comprehensive European and International Studies and PhD students in HC, and Andrei Tarasov, PhD student and research assistant at School of International Studies, University of Trento, Italy. Our colleagues will speak about strategies of regionalist parties in multi-level competition. So I think we can start, and Mark, I hope that 25 or 30 minutes will be enough for your presentation. So the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor Shein. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm happy to see in the audience my friends Julia and Andrei. I met them here in Barcelona when they were doing some research on secessionism and regionalism, and I'm happy to speak to all you all. What I'm going to present today is a work in progress. This is a new research I'm doing with Jordi Mas and Ivan Serrano, two professors of the Open University of Catalonia. And what we try to do here is grasping a little bit more in the nature of secessionism. As you know, and you are all experts and researchers on this topic, as you know, this is a very diverse phenomenon. So our point of departure, and here I illustrate that with some pictures, our point of departure is the diversity of movements. And as Professor Shein said, what we try to do is doing a comparative analysis, building a data set, and analyzing these movements within the European Union in this case. Before that, let me say, so what I'm going to present is basically, I will say a word on my previous research. Then I would like to do an overview on secessionism. And then I will explain this research project and our preliminary results. If you have comments, doubts, criticisms, they are very welcome, because we are still working on that. This is an ongoing project, okay? So in my previous research in recent publications, I have been working on the explanations of secessionism. I also worked in a recent article in the Canadian Journal on types or a typology of independence referendums. And specifically the last year I published a couple of articles, a couple of papers on the specific case of Catalonia and this unilateral referendum we experienced in 2017 here in Catalonia within Spain, and also on ethnic bidding and ethnic competition within the Catalan politics. However, the project we are building here is more focused on a large N analysis and on a comparative perspective on the whole nature of secessionism, and we are looking here at the big picture. Okay, so we are looking for the big picture. We have seen several waves of secessionism across time. You can see here data on the evolution of the international system, data from Griffiths and Batcher publication, and you can see how secessionism typically appeared in three waves, or new states entered the international system in three waves during the First World War. Then during the decolonization period, and also after the fall of Berlin Wall. So we were interested on looking at two things. First, what will happen next? What happens with the movements that are nowadays active in the European Union, and what happens with these movements nowadays? And the second thing is that we were interested on either a sort of new trend within secessionist movements, within secessionism, which is non-violent secessionism, electoral secessionism, and electoral regionalism in a larger sense. As you can see here, I just graphed, I illustrate this data from Griffiths. You can see here that within the history of secessionist movements, what you can see here is the evolution of secessionist movements. Most of them have been using violent tactics. With the end of IRA, the Corsican violent movement, the Basque movement also communicated its ending its activities and so on. We don't have, at least in Western Europe, we don't have any more armed groups looking for secession from using violent strategies. So that's basically the idea. And there is a new trend. There is a new trend also in these non-violent tactics, which are unilateral referendums. Okay, so using democracy as a way to signal, using votes as a way to point out or to signal the existence of these demands. Most of these referendums that you can see here in this graph, especially the ones that happened during the last year, were unilateral independence referendums, compared to the ones that occurred during the 20th century, that most of them were agreed referendums of independence. And on top of that, what we also observe is that most of these movements holding unilateral referendums are not successful. So during the last 2 decades, we have seen more than 20 unilateral referendums, but none of them has been useful to create a new United Nations member. So most of these referendums are leading to a failure of these demands. Well, this was the big picture, but the project we are working on has several objectives, but the main objective is mapping the EU and regionalist movements through electoral results. So we try to test theories of territorial conflict and to grasp a little bit more on the differences between regionalism and secessionism. And we are talking here about electoral regionalism and secessionism. I feel that I am talking alone in my office. Are you following me? Can you hear what I say? Yeah. Okay.
Yes,
okay.
yes,
Okay.
yes.
Thank you. Thank you. So we finally also aim to look at the potential implications in terms of accommodation and counter secessionism of our findings. So what we do is testing one big dependent variable. The big dependent variable here is the existence and the intensity of both to self-determination parties and pro-independence parties. And then we have a battery, a very long list of, drawing from theories of secessionism and regionalism, a very long list of variables on economy, geography, identity, political views, social views, through a battery of variables that we try to test here in our analysis. And behind this, there are of course the main theories, explanatory theories of territorial demands, the ones that say that the most important element here to look at is relative wealth. Poor regions, some people say that poor regions are more secessionist. Other people say that wealthy regions, they are egocentric or egoistic and they want their wealth for themselves, so they are more secessionist. Geography, being peripheral to the center of your own country, makes this region more secessionist. The existence of identities and these kind of things, we try to build a data set with all these variables within it. So the specific data set is based on our method. These units of analysis are meaning the statistical units of analysis used by the European Union to gather all this information. And from different sources, we built a data set on the characteristics of these regions and the regional vote for regionalist and secessionist parties. And so that's more or less the paper I'm writing now for in this project. The variables we include in our data set are the ones that you can see here: regional vote, secessionist vote, relative GDP of the region, degree of innovation, population density, distance from the capital of the region to the capital of the state, of the federation, state belonging identity, European belonging identity, exclusive regional identity, ideology, left-right axis, satisfaction with the government, degree of egalitarianism, xenophobia, degree of agreement with homosexual marriage, and degree of conservative values. So we use this data at regional level to perform a multiple regression and to try to map these variables on the map and to draw some statistical conclusions through a statistical analysis. I will show you the results very briefly, and I will move on to the discussion because I think it's the most interesting part here. The results are first identity. I'm really sorry because these labels are in Catalan, but the yellow color means identity, means a prevalence of regional identity, The blue color means prevalence of dual identity, so both with the state and the region, or the federation and the region, depending on the country. And the purple color means more identification with the majoritarian nation, with the state or with the federation level, the whole country. As you can see, we observe through this variable, we can observe a very diverse Europe, a more diverse Europe than the one that we are used to. You are used to see when we look at the member states map. This is a very different picture with a prevalence of dual identity. So in Europe, there is a prevalence of dual identities in most of the member states. We still include the UK in our study, although they left the European Union. And we also observe important prevalence of regional identity in the periphery of some countries, in northern Italy, in the periphery of Spain or in the peripheries of France. So, and also of the UK and in some other countries. So this is the first thing. Then if we look at the regionalist vote, we observe a slightly similar picture. So these identities tend to translate, and this is, I will talk about the findings, but identity seems to be an important regional identity. It's obviously an important predictor of electoral intensity of regionalist vote. We observe an important intensity of regionalist vote in Spain and Italy, but also in other countries such as Belgium and the UK, and also in the eastern part of Europe, in Romania and in some other cases. So this is the picture of regionalist vote, and then we also observe the prevalence or the importance of secessionist vote in some regions of Europe, although this is a less frequent phenomena than we expected. So we basically find here the usual suspects: Sardinia and Corsica, Catalonia, Basque Country, Galicia, Flanders, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and to lesser extent the German region in Italy, the southern Tyrol. With this data, we perform some statistical analysis. And a first interesting finding, and we should grasp a little bit more on that and refine our data and work a little bit more. But we seem to find a positive correlation between regionalist vote and relative GDP, whereas in secessionist, this is not in secessionist vote in those regions that present a certain level of secessionist vote. From 0.1% to more than 50%, we do not observe a clear pattern regarding the relationship between secessionist and regional GDP or relative wealth. Whereas when we look at emotional belonging, regional belonging, it's a very important driver of secessionism and regionalism. Although, and this is an important element that we would like to study a little bit more. Although what we find is that there are many regions, most of the regions with a strong regional identity develop regionalist movements and electoral regional platforms. However, not in all cases, secessionism is developed. So there is an explanation here that we miss, and we would like to grasp a little bit more. What transforms this regionalist support into a secessionist case? There are few secessionist cases, in fact, and several regions with some degree of regional attachment. And that's an interesting case. And the missing link between what transforms a regionalist movement into a secessionist movement, this is an important element we would like to study a little bit more. We have some hypotheses, but we have to study this. Multiple regressions. And we also find some very interesting things here that we should refine a little bit more. The existence of territorial demands seems to be linked to definedly regional identity. This is a very important variable here. But there are some other variables that are interesting here. We find a strong correlations with two contradictory things: toleration to homosexual marriage and the existence of conservative values, whereas xenophobia seems to have a negative impact. And the degree of innovation of regional economy, according to the EU statistics indicators, seems to be also negatively correlated with territorial demands in general, regional and pro-independence demands, whereas the other variables do not have a clear correlation. Relative GDP seems to be a strong predictor of both intensity, both regional and independentist, and the exclusive identity, it's also a predictor of both intensity, whereas a state belonging has a negative impact on the both intensity of regionalist and secessionist movement. The most interesting part here is the comparison between secessionist vote and regionalist vote. And what we do find is that when we look at secessionist vote intensity, basically the only strong predictor we have is exclusive identity, right? Whereas regionalist vote in orange color seems to have a strong correlation with relative GDP. So basically being a richer region seems to have a relationship with the presence of the intensity of regionalist vote. And also conservative values seem to have a strong relationship with regionalist vote, whereas it has no relationship apparently with secessionist vote. Peripherality, or the distance between, according to some models, the distance between the capital and the region seems to have an impact on secessionist vote intensity, a negative impact in this case. So this is a bit contradictory. So discussion. We find that secessionism is relatively infrequent compared to regionalism. We find that economy is less relevant than expected to explain secessionism, whereas identity seems to be more relevant than expected. There seems to be an attachment of secessionism with progressive modernist regions compared to regionalism that would have a strong attachment with more conservative regions, and we should grasp a little bit more on that. And this could lead to an interesting finding that regionalism seems to appear in more conservative regions than secessionism. And of course, there is a pattern here, and there is a strong relationship between regional and EU identity and regionalism. So both identities, regional and EU, are good predictors of secessionism according to our data. One explanation that we find plausible, and we would like to study a little bit more, and I will stop in the next slide, but one thing that would be interesting here to study is that there seems to be a mediated relationship. This is something that my colleague Marc Guinjoan already said in a recent paper. There seems to be a mediated relationship between an ancestry and language. So ethnicity or language per se are not predictors of secessionism. There is a mediated relationship through the construction of national and regional identity, so through political action and political variables that we do not entirely grasp in our models, that seems to mediate the existence of this ancestry or ethnicity or language and its political expression. There is something in between that we should look for a little bit more. Just a word on implications. If we are right, there seems to be not a very intense relationship, but there seems to be indication or the idea that the Brexit would be a false analogy here, or a false mirror. Some people compare Brexit to Basque, Catalan, Corsican, and these kind of movements, secessionisms. Brexit seems to be an entirely different story here, so it would be a false analogy. There seems to be a certain compatibility between the values, at least, of these secessionist regions and European attachment. right? So contrary to what one would expect, the disintegration that these movements promote comes together with more integration identity within these regions, which is a bit contradictory. But then European integration and states disintegration would be compatible, right? So this is a bit counterintuitive idea. And then there seems to be a difference between regionalism and secessionism. And I was thinking, or we were thinking, that this could lead to a different treatment or to a different analysis of what regionalism means and what secessionism means, and a potential way out or a potential accommodation of these movements through secession clauses or through some similar framework at the European level as the one that was studied or that was experienced in Canada and the UK regarding the cases of Quebec and Scotland. So this was my presentation. Comments are welcome, and we will be happy to get some comments here because we are still working on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Sanjem. It was a really interesting presentation, and I think you started a really large-scale research project with secessionist and regionalism. So, Andrei and Yulia, please.
Okay, thank you. Andrei, can you turn on our presentation? And thank you so much. It's actually a great. Do you hear me? Yes.
Yep. Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's actually a great pleasure and actually great challenge to present our work today with such an amazing professor like Mark Sanjaume, and thank you so much for being here with us. And what we are going to present today is also work in progress. So we actually will be really grateful for your comments and your questions and some ideas how to do it better. And today we will dwell on the behavior of regionalist parties in a multi-level competition, and we'll trace like the behavior of such parties in the terms of coalition or opposition strategies. Please, next slide. As we will start with brief introductory part, which actually doesn't change. I don't know why. Mm-hmm.
Is it changing?
No, I think no. Sorry, just a little technical problems. I think you can turn it off and do once again.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, now it's better.
You see?
Yes.
Oh, it's fine. You see the outline?
No. Now we cannot see. Just try to turn off the demonstration and turn it again. Sometimes it works.
I'm doing. Do you see changes?
No, but we can leave it like this and try to change slides without other regime. Okay, now it's work. I think we can leave it like this, okay?
Okay.
Yes, and we will start with brief introductory part where depict puzzle and our research question. Then we will focus on analytical background, and after we will consider two cases, Scotland and the Basque Country, and at the end we'll make some conclusions and open a discussion part also. Next slide, please.
Do it now? Changes?
Yeah. Now not. I can continue, and you can. Oh, now it's okay.
Okay.
What's actually Spain and the United Kingdom have in common today? Actually, it's two countries that have the decentralized systems with strong regionalist elements. Women in 1996 notes that Spain can be classified as a regionalized unitary state and the UK as a classic unitary state. However, since this year, the domestic political situation in the United Kingdom has changed significantly. I think it's like obvious thing. And the UK now can be considered as a regionalized unitary state, we assume it. Also, in these countries, in Spain, the United Kingdom, the regionalist parties, of course, are influential players. And we, in our research, we choose two parties, regionalist parties. The first one is the Basque National Party, and the second one is the Scottish National Party, which we think like the leading regionalist parties in their regions. And we are interested particularly in why these parties chooses in favor of coalition or coordination positioning behavior and others do not. And how do such parties make this choice? In a multi-level system such as Spain and the United Kingdom, there are strong regional level, strong regionalist subnational parties that are eager to enter this multi-level game. And also Mark told about it in his presentation that we can see like large amounts of votes in favor of such parties. So they make a real competition in the domestic political landscape. And in game theory, multi-level games form a different combinations of relations among possible models, for example, between statewide parties and regionalist parties, that also we know. Some also claim that radical regionalist parties are less likely to get into coalition. You can see on the screen what it is authors. And more radical parties are theoretically less likely to get into government. Parties positions close to the state-wide parties should be more likely to become government members by themselves or in a coalition. It's just an assumption. In this study, we compare the positioning behavior of parties and reveals why one party joins a coalition, why others do not, based on a comparative analysis of cases. And to fulfill our goal, we use the next range of sources. We use political programs of the main regionalist parties that I have mentioned, electoral data based on El País in Spain and the Herald in Scotland, public statements and media statements. As I have mentioned, it's a work in progress. We also will be grateful for your recommendations in this on methodology part. So I give the floor to Andrei.
Contemporary literature on regionalist party gives a lot of explanations, or at least reasons, to regionalist parties to strategically choose their behavior in favor of competition or in favor of coordination with statewide parties. And the existence of subnational level, like in Spain, in Scotland, inevitably forces parties to enter this multi-level game where parties trade coalition support at one level for benefits at another level. And in our research, we use the definition of Massetti and Shekel of regionalist parties as a type of political party which exists only in a particular sub-territory of a state and set up protection of a region in their core political objective. And here we should mention that the existence in the sub-territory does not mean that regionalist parties do not participate at the national level competition or at national level elections. We do so, but the support, what sometimes led them to enter the national parliaments, are exclusively based on their support and their core region which they represent. And contemporary literature gives some, at least we can consider this as a criteria for parties to be more competitive with statewide parties, or at least more cooperative. And the first two criteria, the size of coalition and the ideological proximity, it comes from the classical theories of coalition formation. And the size of coalition means that the less members in such a coalition, the more incentive for a party to enter this. And ideological proximity on left-right dimension means like the closer this the ideological positioning of such a parties, it's more likely them to find an agreement. But the existence of regional level or sub-level adds one more dimension to territorial one, to the competition, to the agreement. And on the territorial dimension also plays a crucial role, because regionalist parties represent a center-periphery cleavage at the political area. And so the closer the position of the parties on the territorial dimension means that if both support more autonomy, or if parties more support centralist visions, the more likely them to enter the coalition. And another very important concept that we found out in the modern literature is a vertical congruence, where subnational government composition coincides with that of the national government, elaborated by Stefuric. And this congruence plays a less important role when political parties have a relative strength in their region. For example, in case of regionalist parties who dominates their region, and party strength we consider both in terms of electoral strength, so the shares of votes at regional and national parliaments, and institutional strength, meaning that the share of seats of that party in the regional or national parliament. But also the blurring boundaries between domestic and international area adds one more interesting dimension to that analysis as a foreign and security policy dimension, because regionalist parties in their political programs put the attention to the security issues. And in our analysis, we will consider the migration as one of these issues which can influence the possibility of parties to cooperate or contestate with state-wide parties. In our first case is a case of Scotland. The Scottish National Party, which is the main party of our analysis, has both high institutional and electoral strength, and basically they dominate the Scottish region, because another party, which is Scottish Greens Party, is relatively small in comparison to SNP. SNP is a secessionist party, meaning that in the territorial domain, where states on the kind of extreme position, demanding independence, and we're leading this agenda at least the last 20 years. And on the economic scale, I consider it as a mainstream left party, according to Massetti. And Scottish National Party was the main promoter of independence referendum, which was not successful in terms of gaining independence, but we get a kind of vow of new powers from statewide parties like Conservatives, Labour, and Liberal Democrats parties. And this vow ended up with the Scotland Bill, which in 2016, which enhanced the political and fiscal rights of Scotland as a region. And during the Scottish parliamentary election, SNP for a bit east where independent stands, but we promised that in case of significant and material changes in the circumstances that prevailed, the independence referendum, we will go for another referendum, which basically happened because we considered Brexit as this material change. And this was one of the main reasons, or one of the main explanations from the Scottish party leadership to renew their bid for referendum. And here it's very important to mention that in spite of being on the one side with David Cameron in this part of Tory Conservative Party for Brexit, we refused to share a platform during the pre-Brexit debates, and this was considered one of the main, one of the reasons why the Remain part wasn't that much successful, because we failed to make kind of agreed strategy to save the UK. And Tory government, a statewide party, Conservative Party, was the dominant party at the national level. So during the general elections 2016, 2019, they won the national parliamentary elections. And all of this considered period, we see the strong opposition, the strong opposition between the SNP and the Conservatives. And for example, in terms of foreign and security policy, SNP highly criticized the authorization of Syrian airstrikes, and in their last electoral program, they highly criticized the Tory migration policy. And SNP also remains the main dominant party in the Scottish region, and the last election demonstrated their existence as a main dominant party. And sorry, we can move to the Basque case.
Thank you so much. Actually, in the Basque country case, of course, it's interesting. Party is the Basque National Party that is actually the leading nationalist party in this region. Why? In the difficult political situation in Spain, for instance, political crisis of 2015-16, referendum in Catalonia, in 2017, the Basque country has maintained greater stability due, actually, I think so, to the stable position of the BNP, which seems actually win every election. And it's also interesting that BNP retained in power 42 years. Actually, when we started research, we didn't think about it, but if we count, it's actually true, and really win every elections. So in this sense, we can claim that their strategy is quite successful. This party kept the power after also the 2019 elections due to the pact with the Socialist Party, and was also the most voted party in the Basque countries in the general election held in Spain in their last Spanish election. And also in this sense, BNP, in different sense, but in overall, can guarantee the election of the Pedro Sanchez as a leader of the Socialist Party. And I think we think also that it's difficult to imagine that Spain can be ruled without like support of the regionalist nationalist parties. According to Massetti, the BNP can be considered as mainstream right-oriented party or center-right-oriented party. The Bildu, now it's their opponent party, but still cannot be like a big rival, cannot make a big rivalry to BNP. As I have said before, regional election, the BNP formed a coalition with list. The key reason was there was a high share of votes for the Bildu. In this sense, in the regional elections, the BNP coalition with socialists can be the only possible strong alternative against Bildu, and allows the BNP to maintain its ruling position now. In this sense, BNP and Bildu both possess high electoral and institutional strength at the regional level. Next slide, please. We use, I don't know whether you can see it well, like briefly, we made there two tables comparing electoral party strengths and institutional party strengths, take some data and see whether BNP and Bildu can possess these both electoral and the institutional party strengths, and we can see that they are both quite strong enough comparing to other parties in the region. Next slide, please. The role of nationalist regionalist parties also can be highlighted in a national level. The leader of Socialist Party, Pedro Sanchez, actually the last elections narrowly won the vote to govern in a coalition. There were 167 deputies voted in favor, including the Basque national parties, 165 against, and there were 18 abstentions. It meant that Pedro Sanchez had the first coalition government since the days of the Second Republic, and for the first time in 80 years. It's actually, I think, an important event. Somehow the support of the regionalist parties such as BNP was of key importance there. In this sense, it could be pointed out that BNP behaving in such a way helped Sanchez to be elected, but it's also a matter of discussion. Regional parties also have their own position on foreign policy issues, as Andrei has said, as an immigration policy. The Basque National Parties is in favor of pro-migration policies, and it's actually different from the Scotland case. In this sense, the PNP is in favor of pro-migration policies, as do the socialists. In this case, the PNP has a relationship with socialists that can be characterized as coordination in a multi-level system. Then I can also say that the electoral program of the PNP firstly adopted the European immigration and asylum policy, as well as a measure for an equitable distribution of unaccompanied immigrant minors, and there were also like other measures adopted by the BNP that can be characterized also as a pro-migration. Like, for instance, migration policy is perceived by the BNP as becoming a fundamental element for the demographic balance, and they also write it in their program and make public speeches on this. Next slide, please. There are also two main factors contributing to the BNP strategic turn towards pragmatism. I think it's also an interesting point here. Like, BNP is a peculiar case of nationalist parties that have like a goal to be independent, like to make independence for the Basque country in the future, but now they're like having stable position and try to negotiate with the center, have really pragmatic policy. The first factor is, we think that is a strong hit to the economies of the autonomous communities in the country as a whole, affected by the global financial and economic crisis. In this regard, the issue of unemployment and regional imbalances have been highlighted by the economic crisis, and BNP assumes it. The second factor is the end of the political violence and self-dissolution of ETA. So then somehow the end of the violent movement for independence. This context has spurred the Basque national parties to rethink its strategy and declare soft demands for more autonomy and negotiate more with the center. In terms of some authors, this phenomenon can be defined as a silent strategic rethinking that is a turn towards pragmatism. So to sum up, the socialists maintained in power in a coalition, as we think at the national level, mainly due to the fact that BNP supports, it's not only BNP, but one of such parties that support Sanchez. According to the estimation of electoral and institutional party strength, the BNP has a relationship also with socialists that can be characterized as coordination and multi-level. And that is
Sanchez when entered the coalition, when entered the leadership of PSOE, said that PSOE will go for the federalist way. So of course we see that maybe his actual policy is not coincide fully with it, but at least he promised and started with that agenda. In terms of migration policy, Scottish National Party framing Tory policy as antagonistic and subsuming all the foreign policy issues in their core territorial terms and use them to enhance, to promote their independence, and basically saying that independent Scotland will do different foreign policy, will do different migration policy, and the Tory policy is not facilitate the growth and the well-being of the Scottish people. Whereas the Basque Party with PSOE will find themselves in more coordination. They both have a pro-migration view on policy. And finally, the competition at regional level. SNP is a dominant regionalist party. The Scottish Greens is not the same weight competitor for them, and that's why the vertical congruence for the SNP has fewer advantages when playing on territorial contestation. We see that where anti-Tory rhetoric is very successful for Scottish national parties to maintain their leadership and their main position in Scotland region. Whereas for Basque National Party, we see that it's, first of all, Basque BNP has a strong competitor, regionalist competitor, Bildu, and vertical congruence is a way for them to ensure their power in the regional level, but also this vertical congruence, as Julia demonstrated, was also beneficial for PSOE because it's the support of BNP was helped Pedro Sanchez to be elected as a prime minister. And here we thank you very much for your attention, and we also would like to hear your comments and suggestions. Thank you very much.
Yulia, Andrei, thank you so much for your presentation. I think it looks interesting to consider both presentations and as the same topic. And unfortunately, we don't have much time, so I want to ask a small question to our speakers. Speaking about first paper, I think that Professor Sanjem gives us a fresh perspective on things related with secessionism and regionalism and its difference in European Union. And I have two small questions. First, in my understanding, the line there is a very thin line between secessionism and regionalism. Yeah, and in theoretical discussions, it is difficult to catch when we cross this line. We see how secessionalists in unfavorable situations become regionalists, And we see that regionalists having collected resources can mobilize them from the idea of independence and so on. So in your opinion, is it still productive from the research point of view to divide parties and voters into regionalist and secessionist, or maybe it is two sides of one phenomenon? This is the first question. And the second point, can we talk about a real secession in the European Union today? So I think that the current configuration of the European Union makes the separation process very difficult, and European institutions supported national governments in conflict between center and regions. We can see it in the United Kingdom and in Spain. And moreover, COVID-19 pandemic has reserved the trend towards decentralization of European national states. So can we say that secession in the European Union nowadays is a myth or something like that? And I want to say once again thank you to Julia and Andrei for presentation. I think it's really important to compare behavior and positions of regionalist parties and answer the question why one party joins the coalition and while others do not. This is a very difficult research question requiring not to get confused in a large number of variables and requiring the analysis of a large amount of empirical material. And I think that you had a very interesting attempt to answer this question, and it's important that you focused on the migration issue, which as a rule is not very highlighted when we talk about the strategies and programs of European regionalists. And at the same time, I saw your manuscript, and I would like to express a number of comments and questions regarding the content of your text and content of your presentation. First, it is not clear about terms and approaches that were used in the paper. So how do you understand the terms mainstream and mainstream party? Do you mean their ideological profile, or their electoral dominance, or their willingness to join and to create coalitions? And is it possible to be at the same time a secessionist party and a regional mainstream party like Scottish National Party? Moving on, it is not clear exactly how you used process tracing method. So I agree that it is a prospective methodological approach, but how exactly was it used, and how exactly did it allow to analyze empirical material? For me, this question remained open. And I would like to maybe remember the wonderful book of Bonnie Megait, a British political scientist, who told about the main factor of the electoral success or failure of regional parties in the European Union. And she talked about strategies of mainstream and center-left and center-right mainstream parties as a main factor of failure or success of regional parties in European Union. And maybe perhaps you should consider the positions and strategies of the mainstream parties as an additional factor. And it is an interesting thing that sometimes mainstream party uses a strategy which based on the principle that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So what does it mean in practice? For example, the fact that Labour Party in United Kingdom as a center-left mainstream party can maybe support and Scottish National Party if it brings electoral losses to another mainstream party, Conservative Party or Tories. I think it is a useful argument, and maybe you can consider it too. And finally, in my opinion, it is not clear about the cooperation between Scottish National Party and Scottish Greens. So in your text, you said that Scottish National Party has little incentive to cooperate with Greens, but we saw the situation after the regional elections in 2021, where Scottish Greens and Scottish Nationalists created the coalition. So maybe you should clarify this moment. Okay, thank you. I will stop here and maybe want to comment on something what I said. Thank you.
I think we can start with Mark, and also we have a question in chat.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Andrei and Julia. It was really interesting, and I learned a lot on the Basque case. And we could certainly discuss some specific things. I can send some comments to you also, because I have some comments here. Yeah, regarding your questions, Professor Shane, I think that yeah, the first question, yeah, it makes sense distinguishing secessionism from regionalism, at least for an empirical purpose. We have a very diverse Europe here at regional level. We have a very diverse map of regional parties at regional level. And one way we found to classify them was basically looking at their party manifestos and taking a very simple rule, adopting a very simple rule, which is if they ask, or if their objective is creating a new state or not. That's the main difference we do between regionalist and secessionist movements. And what we found is that within this diversity of parties, for example, the Partido Riojano from the Rioja region in Spain, they never asked for a Riojan state within Spain, and they will probably never do. So they are clearly regionalist, whereas the Scottish National Party from the very beginning said that they would like to see a independent Scottish Republic. So they are pro-independence. It makes sense. That's precisely what we try to do in our paper, making sense of this and finding the differences between these two, between the supports and the characteristics of these regions supporting regionalist and pro-independence parties. Yeah, and regarding your second question, yeah, you are totally right. The European Union is a club of states, and seeing an internal secession within the European Union, it's hard to imagine, at least without the agreement of the member state, so the parent state. So imagine that Spain or the current Spanish government agrees on holding a referendum on Catalan independence or on Basque independence, and independence gets a popular support and wins more than 50% in this referendum, and the Spanish government agrees to do that, to this process, then which is very unlikely and it's not probable. It's a possibility, but it's not probable. But in this case, in the case of agreement and a consensual breakup, then I think we can imagine a secession within the European Union. It could be possible, but without the agreement of the parent state, it's almost impossible. Yeah, you are totally right. Yeah, and thank you
very yeah, thank you very much, Sergey, for your comments. You ask very interesting and at the same time very difficult questions, but we we mean by saying mainstream party. And by saying the mainstream party, we refer to McGuitt definition that the mainstream party are electorally dominant actors in the center left, center, and center right blocks on the left-right political spectrum. So that means that this is theoretically possible to say that Scottish nationalists are electorally dominant in their region. So if we talking about the regional level, so we can consider SNP as a mainstream party in their region. But of course, if we go one more step up and go to the national level, of course, SNP is not a mainstream party. So it's a national level. So here is a kind of relative approach which we used by saying, you definitely right, we should confusion. Another question you ask about the possibility of national mainstream parties to use regionalist parties to using this strategy, enemy of my enemy. In case of Scotland, it didn't work well because, for example, during the national elections 2015, SNP, basically Nicola Sturgeon, invited to main reason why we refused such kind of cooperation because of the territorial domain, because of high disparities between labor parties and the SNP in terms of Scottish secessionism movement. And regarding the Scottish Greens and the SNP, yes, of course, we are aware of, but in August, SNP basically create kind of coalition agreement, and two ministers, basically two leaders of Scottish Greens, entered the government. But here we again think that it was an SNP choice, and SNP in this negotiation acted as a dominant player, and we just used it to enforce their secessionist agenda. So we still strictly dominant party. We just left one seat to get the absolute majority in regional parliament. And here, of course, we our reasoning in our article regarding this fact.
Yes, thank you, and actually, thank you so much for valuable comments. We of course we'll think about it and make our research design clear and more visible. And about process tracing, yes, it's actually, I have mentioned that there like at the beginning of our presentation on the comparative case analysis without process tracing, because now we were thinking about like maybe to eliminate it on this stage, but we think that the case study is completely enough for this research. And I also would like to address the question in the chat about populist politicians. That's actually, I think, quite interesting. That's like about the populist politicians that can be like a strong factor in a current peaceful regionalist movements and should be used as like as a variable, something like that. I think it's really interesting now to address, because we see that the strategy of regionalist nationalist parties are changed, and there is also was a question about this blurred line between regionalist, secessionism, and maybe it's also interesting to conceptualize something like the nation or the notion of populist at the regional level, something like that. I think it's really interesting. And now we can see that some parties, nationalist parties like BNP, they changed their strategy. They started to be like more pragmatic. They haven't their program somewhere in the future. Today they are talking about other actually policies, so it's really interesting how it's correlated, because I think that previously in the history it was impossible that nationalist parties have something in their program and like make another policy. It's like yes, I think that's it, but I also see the hand.
Yeah,
I think it's also a question. No,
yeah,
I don't know whether
Alexander
I'm allowed to do this. But I see that.
So. Yes, speaking about the regionalist parties. As far as I understood, the structure of regionalism in the West and in Britain, it's looked like more a pocket structure or a hotspot structure. So we do not see a kind of consolidated picture here. Meanwhile, in the Eastern and Southern Europe, the picture is more consolidated. Yes, so we see more yellow color, like in the northern Italy, in somewhere in Austria, in Bavaria, and even in the Eastern Adriatic. So my question is, do you recognize this difference? If you do, can you give an explanation of this according to your methodology? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Pivovarenko. Yeah, thank you for your question. I see. Yeah, this is an old debate in nationalism studies. The East-West debate was first theorized by Kuhn theories on Eastern nationalism and Western nationalism, and you probably know about this dichotomy between civic and ethnic nationalism and these kind of things. I think the difference you spotted is not exactly related to a prevalence of ethnic identity over civic identity, as Kuhn used to say in the 70s. What I do think is that basically in France, but also in Germany, in some parts of Germany, but basically in France, what you saw in the map, and I can share again the map. This is data from the. You probably can see the map now or not. I don't know. Can you see the map?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. Okay. So this is basically the past. What we see here. This is brutal identity. So we use the European Social Survey. They ask for the identity of the citizens, and the citizens answer if they feel more attached to the region, to the state, or to both of them. To the region here is the yellow color. So what we basically see here is the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the past within the Iberian Peninsula of the former kingdoms that created the Spanish kingdom, the Kingdom of Aragon and the Kingdom of Castile, and also this union of crowns in the 17th and the 18th century in the UK. I think it's pretty clear here, and there is a lot of research now on that, on the persistence of past institutions among the population, the persistence of former institutional settings that are not there anymore, or in some cases they still exist. But in any case, they shape the national identity or the regional identity of these people. There is a difference here that we cannot see in this map. And that's why I think it's also worth to distinguish between regionalist movements, because there is a difference here in regional attachment. For example, regional attachment in some parts of France, it's regional attachment with French national identity. So they feel more attached to the region, but they do not, citizens do not necessarily feel more, they do not feel the existence of a regional nation. And the example of Cantabria in Spain or Asturias are pretty clear. In Asturias, there is no feeling of the existence of a national Asturian nation, besides a very marginal percentage of the population, but there is a strong regional identity. Whereas in other regions, there is a strong national feeling, there is a nation building, as in Scotland or in the Basque Country or in Catalonia, regions in which the nation building has created an alternative national regional identity. We cannot distinguish here. I think there is a difference here, and all these regional identities that we see here along the borders of the former parts of the former German Empire and so on. These forms are more regional in the sense that non-national than in other cases. But we should grasp a little bit more on that, and we should have more data. And this is the interesting question here, as you say, is the divide between the East and the West. What we do observe is that, and the South, obviously, what we do observe is one more difference. So there is regions without national identity, there is regions with national identity, and what we also see is regions with irredentist identity. A pretty clear example are the Hungarian minorities within Romania. So this is not a regional identity as a Scottish one, but a national identity from a border country that has somehow evolved and persisted into a neighboring country. The Crimean crisis and the Crimean situation, it's you know probably more than I on that. It's an example of that. So Russian identity within a territory that formerly belonged to Ukraine. So these are irredentist conflicts, and we observe more irredentist identities in the East than in the West. But we should continue studying that. And thank you for your question.
And if I may, maybe another small question. According to this difference between regional and ethnic regionalism and irredentism, how do you explain the things that we see in the Eastern Adriatic? Because I see some yellow painting there, but on the other hand, I don't see an ethnic issue there.
Where did you say? Sorry, Professor.
I mean, how do you explain the things that we see in the Adriatic basin? I mean, okay, the western part, but also the eastern part, because I recognized some yellow paintings in the northeast Adriatic, if I am correct. Yeah, right here, maybe a little bit upstairs.
You mean here? You mean here? Yeah. This is Istria.
Yeah.
This is Istria.
Yeah.
Istria has a very strong regional identity within Croatia.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own dialect,
Mm-hmm.
their own language.
And do you see like more national thing here, or it's regional issue?
I see it according to the parties, and there is also, if we look at the regionalist vote, there is a lot of regionalist vote here in Istria, but the Istrian case is entirely regionalist. As far as I know, the parties there are not secessionist, as far as I know. Yeah. If we look at the secessionist vote, they are not appearing. Whereas some parties in southern Tyrol within Italy, in the border between Italy and Austria, the German minority there, they have some pro-independence parties, and they also have some irredentist parties, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry we don't have much time, and we have two last questions from Andrei Tarasov and from Professor Grabevnik. Andrei, please.
Thank you. Mark, I have a question to Mark, and this question is purely methodological, because I'm very interested in when you considering exclusive regional identity as a variables and an independent variable for your model, how do we really control it for a do we ensure that this parameter causes regionalist or secessionist vote, but not is vice versa? Because every time that I tried to approach this link between secessionism and regional identity, I always end up with this methodological question, and maybe you will help to explain it.
Yeah, thank you, Andrei. Yeah, this is a very good question, and it's the chicken egg problem. And I think that we should improve our model, and we are trying to do that in the paper through individual data. So we will try to include individual data here on past and present vote. And this could be a possibility. This could be a possibility. So including change. So one possibility could be including change into the, for example, in Catalonia, this is pretty clear. In Catalonia in the 90s, and it's above 50%, almost 52% in the last elections. So through this change, you can track this. National identity, I have to say, at least in Catalonia, has remained very stable. It has changed a little bit, the exclusive identity, but not as dramatically as the secessionist vote, but not at all. So there is here, that's why I said that regional identity is a good predictor of regionalist vote in a larger sense, in general, but secessionism appears in under very specific circumstances. And not all these movements are secessionists. And the transformation of these regionalist parties into secessionist parties, of regionalist movements into secessionist parties, this is the question, I think.
Thank you. And the last question from Professor Grabevnik from PEM University. He asked Professor Sanjim about difference between your research and Regional Authority Index, and about methodology, and about cases. So do you think that few number of electoral secessionism cases is enough to make quantification analysis? So Professor Sanjim, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure if I understood the question. If it's enough, the number of cases, is that right?
You can see also the question in our chat. It's like more, it's bigger.
Sorry. I didn't see.
But you
Okay.
understand correctly. Yeah, it is about a number of cases.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Well, yeah, we have the N. It's like around. I think it's enough. We have an N of 400, 411, 359. So it's okay, but we could improve that, expanding moments as one data set. Then we would have more than 1,000, and we were talking about doing that. I know about the RAI index, and we should include these variables of institutional power and institutional capacity in our analysis. Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sanjem. We have another question in our chat, but this question is about future of European integration, and I think that this question is not about the main topic of our discussion. So I think on this note we can finish our seminar. I will wait your article in peer review journals, and I want to say thank you to all our speakers for really thoughtful presentations, and thank you for all participants of our European seminar. See you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. See you soon. And please, if you come to Barcelona, you are more than welcome. So call me. I will be happy to host you here at the university and to chat about politics.
Okay, we remember.
Will do.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you so much.